Hello everyone, and welcome to Software Architecture Monday. My name is Mark Richards, and in this lesson number 157, we'll take another look at architecture decision records, and specifically incorporating ADRs, or architecture decision records, into existing systems. Now you can get a listing of all of the lessons I do on Software Architecture Monday at my website at developer2architect.com/lessons. And from here you can watch the videos or you can watch them on YouTube as well. A lot of material comes from these two books, and as a matter of fact, Neil Ford and I talked about architecture decision records and our fundamentals of software architecture, but I wanted to talk about something that's not in that book. You see, just for some background, I have talked about architecture decision records before. Lesson 55, many years ago, I kind of talked about what are architecture decision records. And then fairly recently, well, I guess last year, in lesson 141, I also talked about managing those architecture decision records and talked about the status with that request for comment one, which I'm very fond of. So if you haven't seen those, it might be good to actually view those videos before this one. But if not, and you're not familiar with architecture decision records, it's worthwhile seeing these two videos. So an architecture decision record, just in a quick review, is usually a short text file where every decision you make as an architect has a corresponding separate text file. Now, I usually use ASCII doc, but you can certainly use Markdown, plain text, or any kind of other thing that you want to use. But there's 5 main sections within an ADR. The title of it, the status, which I talked about in lesson 141, proposed, accepted, superseded, or request for comment. The context, which allows us to provide some short, brief level of documentation about why I'm having to make this architecture decision, and maybe some of the components involved, and also the alternatives that I considered. The decision, which is the justification part, the most important part of an architecture decision record. And finally, the consequences section, where we document our trade-offs. So here's what happens. As a matter of fact, I just this week, or I should say last week, encountered this scenario. So let's say we have a software architect who says, you know, I really like the idea of ADRs, and we all like these, but we've got an existing system. I mean, does it really even make sense to start using ADRs, or should I really wait until we have a new system in place? And the short answer to that question is absolutely. Yes, it still makes sense to start using ADRs. So of course, then we have the follow-up question. Okay, in that case, how should I start using these? Let me show you, and that's what the context of this lesson is to how to, and an approach to start leveraging and using ADRs on existing systems to develop that kind of brain trust and that documentation. And for an example, to show you a concrete example, let's take a student testing system. Now, this is a system for standardized tests that all students in all grade schools take. And it's, when I say standardized, it's the same test. Students show up like this and take a test that's managed by a proctor, and then they get some results. Well, this is the existing architecture. So this system has been in place for, let's say, 5 years. And notice here, if I kind of explain very quickly, students go through a testing gateway and they sign in using this sign-in service. I've got a fraud detection service here just to make sure that they're not cheating or maybe are taking a test for somebody else, or signing in multiple times and taking a test over and over to get a better grade. This test taker here retrieves questions from the database, caches them, and then receives an answer and serves the next question up. And then finally, and let me erase some of this so you can actually see what the test taker here now then sends that information, that answer, to an auto-grader, where it's auto-graded via queues right here and then stored. Well, if this is an existing system, then how do we start incorporating ADRs? Because decisions have already been made. Well, this system may have been done a long time ago, and unfortunately some of the people may have left, but still may be there. But we start looking at the architecture and asking questions. For example, why does each service have its own separate database in kind of the form of microservices? Why not combine some of these or have a domain-based database or even a single database? I don't know why everything has a separate database, because it is rather expensive. And that would be a good candidate for an initial ADR. As a matter of fact, another question here that I might have if I were a new architect or just kind of wondering about the system, why are the test questions separated from their corresponding answers? I mean, these things are intimately tied, and we don't want those to get out of sync, yet they're in two separate databases. I don't know why, because, well, there's been talk about combining them, but I'm not sure if I should or not. That's a really good candidate for an architecture decision record for this existing system. As a matter of fact, we have this fraud service. I might ask the question, why? I mean, why is that functionality separated in a different service? Why not just add that to the sign-in service when a student signs in? Why take the time during a highly elastic system to go out to the fraud service? I don't know why. That's another really good candidate for an architecture decision record for an existing system. As a matter of fact, these queues, we have multiple of them, and they're sharded. And they're sharded in a specific way, maybe by school district, maybe by school, maybe it's just random, but why are they sharded in that manner? And why do we have multiple queues? That's a good candidate also for an ADR. So you see, in any given system, you're probably curious about why something was done a certain way, or you want to challenge it. And so let me show you 3 core steps. First, what we try to do is to figure out why that particular decision was made. Hopefully, we can track down who made that and talk to them and say, why did you separate the test questions from the answers? And they probably have a good reason, but no one knows it. This is great to document. But a lot of times, the person who made that decision left the company several years ago, and no one knows why. It's just kind of the way it's always been. We've never kind of questioned it. Well, I'm going to question it now, because we should have that documented why. There might be a good reason. So I might analyze this and say, why would I separate questions and answers? And I'm like realizing, oh, for security. Because the answer keys for those tests are only accessed by the auto grader, which there's no network path from the student. And so that keeps those answers secure. That's probably a good reason. So I might, or would, generate an ADR for that. But if I don't have a rationale like that, I might think, it's better consistency to have those joined. And I might write an ADR with a different decision to join those databases together and see if it's challenged by anybody. And then, if that's the case, I might write an architecture story then, if it's necessary to change that decision and maybe combine those databases. And this is the value of starting to look at your architecture of an existing system and sort of, quote, document it using architecture decision records. And as a matter of fact, if you're curious about architecture stories, look at lesson 106 in Software Architecture Monday. That's where I talk about those architecture stories, if you're curious about what those are. So you can kind of see the value here. What we do as we take an existing system, we don't have to go overly granular, just to start out with some major decisions that were made, major constructs in the system, starts generating that documentation, that brain trust about why certain things are done. And by doing that, this happens. Because now we've decided to break up this auto grader right here. And instead of doing inline auto grading, we've decided it would be much more efficient just to get that answer persisted, and we'll do post grading afterwards. We don't have to take the time to auto grade it, and it might speed up that process a bit. Now we can say, since we're using ADRs, I should write an ADR for that decision because it does change the structure, because we will be adding another service, kind of that background service, to then query those student answers. And then we're sharing a database. This is all structural and probably has some trade-offs involved with it. And sure enough, we write that ADR, and now we're in the mode of architecture decision records. And so this has been lesson 157, just showing you, yes, it still is important and useful to start taking an existing system and start creating some architecture decision records for some of the major architectural decisions. And surprisingly, it might uncover some things that we've always just accepted, but there's trade-offs and we have no reason for doing it that way. So I hope you enjoyed this lesson. Stay tuned in 2 more weeks for another lesson in Software Architecture Monday.